Hi everyone, this is the first self-defense Q&A. So Jojo starts out by asking, can you defend multiple attackers when you're on the ground? Well, if you're good, or alternately, if you're really strong, yes, you can definitely roll with multiple attackers. I've done it. It's about 4 times harder to roll with 2 guys than it is to roll with 1 guy. But it can be done. That's talking about rolling in a context of jiu-jitsu, in a context of not striking. If it goes to the ground, then if the guys are skilled grapplers, you're screwed. Because like I said, it's 4 times harder. If you're here and they're just a little bit worse than you, but there are 2 of them, basically you're gonna lose because you won't be able to dominate the position. If you're very skilled and they're not at all skilled, then so long as you take somebody out really quickly, you may take a few shots. Now, if I was in that situation, I would try to get somebody's back and I would try to use the rear naked choke and put them unconscious. That we can also use that other guy a little bit as a shield. You can keep that other guy between yourself and the other attacker. Also, when you're here and your head is tucked, your most vulnerable parts aren't that exposed, right? I mean, the really, really big targets for bad knockouts are the chin, the temples, the back of the neck. If that gets stomped, that's really, really bad. The groin's a bad target. Getting hit in the body and that can wind you. But if you've got somebody on top of you, and you're using them as a shield and you're putting them unconscious, it doesn't take very long. 5 to 10 seconds. That might be enough time. Now, I'm not in any way, shape, or form advocating if you have multiple attackers, take it to the ground. But if you're good at doing things like the rear naked choke on the ground, then something like an arm drag to a standing rear naked choke is a really good option. Because it can, again, that's even more pronounced. You can use the other guy as a shield to keep him between you and the other guy. If you're talking multiple attackers with weapons, I'm sure somebody's going to ask about that. Well, you better get a weapon as well. And in the context of talking about weapons defense, 1 person versus multiple attackers, it has been done. It can be done. Once again, your skill with weapons better be up here. If all the guys are almost as good as you, you're going to get rushed. What I would suggest doing, if you're interested in that topic, is doing a bit of sparring. Trying 1-on-2 sparring. 1 person, you're here, and you got 2 guys who you're boxing against, kickboxing against. It's exhausting. It's exhausting because you're always moving. You're always trying to, if there's 1 guy here and 1 guy here, you're trying to circle around, so you're only fighting 1 guy. And the other guy's using the shield. As a result, you're constantly moving. And now you're so adrenalized that it can be very, very exhausting. Grappling with 2 people, again, a really good exercise. But my suggestion there, it's so easy to get caught in a position where you can't tap because 1 guy's twisting your arm, the other guy's tied up your mouth so you can't verbally submit, your legs can't move. It's really important to have somebody watching that. To do 1-on-2 grappling without somebody supervising, making sure that the 1 guy isn't getting completely destroyed, is a really good idea. Another really good weapon for a multiple scenario attacker is the heel hook. Because with a heel hook, you can get in, do the damage very, very quickly, and then get out. And the guy's crippled. He can't run after you. They say that in the old days, they developed Sambo. Sambo is a Russian system similar to Judo with a lot more leg locks, and the shtick, because I don't think it's the truth, the shtick is that the reason the Russians developed Sambo is because this way on the battlefield, if you kill somebody, then you lose 1 opponent. If you break somebody's arm, you lose 1 opponent. If you break somebody's leg, you lose 3 opponents, because it takes 2 guys to carry that 1 wounded guy off the battlefield. That being said, I'm pretty sure the Russians facing the Germans in World War II didn't throw away their rifles and go in for the rolling knee bar or the flying heel hook or anything like that. I'm pretty sure that it stayed mostly combative. But it's a useful thing. If you really had to put somebody out of commission, the only thing that's really faster than a choke is a heel hook. And we're just talking a full power heel hook. Don't wait for the tap, rip, and then clear distance and then deal with your remaining attackers. Can you cover the best takedown to teach to a non-martial artist? I just answered this in a podcast that I did on a show called How to Do Your 20s. I also put it on my Instagram feed, just a little snippet. Definitely the 2 places that you should start with takedowns if you're not going to spend hours and hours and hours doing the uchikomi required in something like judo, is the double leg takedown and then the clinch. The clinch, while not technically a takedown, is still a form of grappling, and it allows you to control somebody standing. It allows you to move their weight around. If you're here, even if you're just off balancing them, and they're stumbling here and then they're stumbling back, during that time that they're off balance, they're not hitting you. They're not kneeing you. It's always easy to say, yeah, I would just uppercut the guy and knee him in the balls. Well, it's not so easy if your weight's continually being disrupted. So the first thing I would do is work on the clinch, and then when you start coming to takedowns, I would just work the double leg takedown. There are tons of good takedowns in judo. If you have a background in judo, stick with what works. If you have takedown in wrestling and your favorite takedown is the high crotch or the arm spin or whatever, perfect. That can work. The foot trip's another really good takedown in a self-defense context because it's so low effort and you stay standing while the guy falls, but it takes a lot of work. So the simplest takedown for self-defense purposes is the double leg, and not the low double leg where they're coming in and hitting the knee on the mat and bouncing. It's just level changing and then in, and it's called a blast double, basically trying to run the guy through with a high-speed tackle. Very conceptually, if you're chasing me with a double leg and I'm running backwards, you can run faster forwards than I can run backwards. So if you're running at me, grabbing my legs, further impeding my ability to run backwards, I will eventually fall over. Now, there's more to the double leg than simply, bending over and running forwards. But it's not a bad way to think about it, and why I would suggest that the double leg is a really good takedown start. If you're here, a very, very common problem with the double leg is if I'm trying to get to my opponent's leg is going in like this. See, I'm going down at an angle. That's not what I want to do. I want to level change first. Level change and then shoot. In a self-defense context, you can think that the guy's going to be probably 9 times out of 10 punching at your head up here, right? So my head's here. If I level change, it's a duck. Now the shots are going over my head, and then I continue forward. Hope that answered your question. J-Man Hong, will I produce a self-defense focused BJJ DVD in the future? It's a possibility. What I'm doing for now is we're starting a different website. Grapplearts going to keep on going. Grapplearts is, don't worry, we're not phasing out Grapplearts, but we are starting a site called Self-Defense Tutorials. Starting to put lots of good information there that's more self-defense oriented. I think it was a little bit much trying to put all the stuff onto Grapplearts, all the sports stuff, all the MMA stuff, all the jiu-jitsu stuff, all the no-gi stuff. So we're going to keep all the grappling stuff in the on the Grapplearts, and then start putting more of the self-defense oriented stuff on Self-Defense Tutorials. So that's a new website. There's some really good stuff on there already. A couple really good articles. Also a book that you can download. It's a PDF talking about the interplay between grappling and self-defense, which is pretty relevant to this current conversation. But in terms of products, no, we don't have anything yet. We may do it in the future if there's enough demand and there are enough requests for it. What's the way to pass the guard easily with a stronger person? One of the biggest problems with passing the guard of a stronger person is making posture. If they're doing the guard properly, they will be controlling your posture. This is a fairly athletic posture, right? Like I'm not completely out of shape. But if their guard is bending me like this and pulling my head down and I'm completely broken down forwards, or if I'm all twisted up, I'm not going to be passing the guard. If the guy's really strong, if the guy's really using his grips effectively, then I'm not going to ever be able to get up into establish my base, establish my posture, get good structure. And without those things, there's no way I'm passing anybody's guard, let alone somebody who's way bigger and stronger than me. So I think I'll just leave it there. The first thing you got to do is establish posture, and typically the best thing you can do there is grip fight. What's keeping you completely bent over? Well, most of it are grips on your collar, grips on your sleeves, grips on your pants. Then there is, of course, leg action as well, right? If he's got you in a closed guard, it's a simple example, he crosses his ankle and he pulls you in. As you post, he's going to tie your hands up with grips. But if you get really good at stripping grips, then you can establish your posture. Once you have your posture, now you can go about using a variety of guard passes. Now you can go about the problem of opening the closed guard. Let's say we're talking closed guard. With a closed guard, for against a bigger person, the best thing you can do is stand up. Here's why. If you stay down on the ground, you know, he's much bigger and stronger than you. If you stand up, his weight is pulling him down. Now, say he's got his legs closed, I've got an imaginary opponent, he's got me in the closed guard, I've managed to stand up. That can be tricky, but nobody ever said it was going to be easy. So you stand up, and now you start helping gravity. Gravity is pulling his legs down. If you start pushing his legs down with your arms, or even inserting your arms in between his legs, and using that, you're using his weight, his asset, his mass against him, because it's pulling him back down to the ground. So standing up, and if you're smaller, hopefully you're faster, then you can start using more speed-based passes. Let's try that again. Speed-based passes, because you're certainly not going to be using a smash pass on somebody who outweighs you by 50, 60, 100 pounds. You're going to have to be the fast little guy zipping around. So think more X-Wing, more TIE Fighter, less Death Star. Do Wristlocks and Anklelocks work in self-defense? Oh boy, you really want to get me in trouble, don't you? Wristlocks and Anklelocks certainly do work in self-defense. What doesn't work is the Aikido wristlock. And I'm sorry to all my Aikido friends. I've learned a lot from Aikido, but I've also learned that it doesn't usually work in the context. One person once described it as a great martial art for restraining aged professors run amok. And I think that's very useful. So if a 70-year-old professor who's upset about your incorrect citation in some essay that you write comes at you running like this, by all means, wrist lock them, and hopefully they'll do that big giant Aikido self-throw. In the real world, however, the problem with wrist locks is unless your forearms and your grip are gigantic and you can just grab onto a wrist, force it into a bent position, and then use it, there's no control over the rest of the body. So while you're trying to do your outward wrist lock, he's going to be hitting you, he's going to be instinctively stripping your grip. It certainly can work. I have seen wrist locks in sparring, but compared to the other number of locks, leg locks and I'm talking, sort of an MMA type of sparring thing. I have seen wrist locks in MMA sparring. They're hard because, of course, the glove reinforces the wrist, and all the Aikido guys will go, of course, it doesn't work because the gloves reinforce the wrist. But if you're wearing the right kind of glove, you can still get wrist locked. But it's hard because you're not controlling your opponent. Wrist locks are much, much easier on the ground. And I think they can come on very, very quickly. You have to be very careful applying wrist locks. But on the ground, you can stop the movement. Now you can focus just on the wrist. And I love wrist locks on the ground. In fact, I use a lot of Aikido wrist locks. Like Sankyo is a good one. On the ground, escaping from rear mount, say, turning in. I wonder if I've got a video on that on YouTube. I should do it because it's, if you actually pull that off, you can go and do a victory lap and feel really good about yourself. Ankle locks, yeah, I think ankle locks work, but if you're in ankle lock country, in self-defense, I would switch to the heel hook. Unless you're restraining your aged uncle who had a few too many beer at the family picnic, if this is a serious situation and escalation is called for, I would go to the heel hook and just explode into it with all my might, trying to tear as many of the ligaments and destroy as much of the cartilage as I could. And you can do this fairly easily unless the guy's ridiculously flexible. So I would value the heel hook over the ankle lock. And for the wrist lock, yeah, you can pull it off, but you got to be way better than your opponent, or you need to be completely drunk, or you need to have really gigantic forearms and a super strong grip, or a semi-compliant opponent. I mean, there's lots of pictures of cops escorting protesters off with a gooseneck come-along wrist lock. Well, those people aren't really fighting. They're not there swinging for the fences. They're sitting there, singing "We Shall Overcome," and the cop picks them up and gets the wrist lock. And they know that if they resist and try and fight their way out of the wrist lock, they're going to get billy clubbed, they're going to get tasered, they're going to get shot. So they are somewhat compliant. To just say to point to cops use wrist locks all the time, yeah, and most of the time it's against a semi-resisting opponent. Not a fully, not in the middle of a full-on street fight. That being said, if you're really, really good at them, yeah, you can incorporate them. Okay, Evan Wilson asks, when he does a double leg in a real fight, he's worried about smashing his knee on the pavement. Yeah, Evan, just go back to the beginning of the video where I talked about my first suggested takedown for self-defense, and that's a high double. Just dropping levels and then running forward, and basically go look at early Randy Couture fights. Early Randy Couture fights, he very rarely hit a knee. he'd usually do a high standing double. So I don't recommend hitting the knee and bouncing it off the pavement. That's a bad idea. Stay with a high double and you should be all right. Keith Van Ochen, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Do you personally teach striking in a self-defense course? I don't have a self-defense course out yet. Might do that in the future. If so, it'll be on self-defense tutorials. There's the site. You know, I'm going to write that down. Stand by. Still visible? So if and when the self-defense course comes out, that's where it'll be. Still, it's an embryonic idea. I am passionate about self-defense in martial arts. I mean, I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is hands down my favorite martial art, but I am a martial artist first and a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsuka second. I'm interested in self-defense first, and any competitive aspects of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu second. I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a great way to develop your self-defense skills. Maybe we'll get into that later. And it's a very good way of training under resistance, which is absolutely critical for developing your self-defense capabilities. You have to be trying to beat somebody who's trying to beat you. It's so much more useful than like technique number 1. That's bullshit. It's not really going to work when push comes to shove because you haven't pressure tested it. You haven't forged it against somebody who really doesn't want you to do something to them, and you're really trying to do it to them. But back to the striking thing, absolutely. I think some basic strikes are really important. I think your basic elbow, either a diagonal cutting elbow, typically aiming for the brow, a horizontal elbow, typically aiming for the jaw, but also aiming for the brow. Knees, majority of ring deaths in Thai boxing happen from the knees, not from the kicks, not from the punches, not from the elbows, it's the knees. It's also a pretty resilient part of the body, and it's the easiest way for a smaller person to develop a large amount of power. One of my favorite stories is about Daniel Santo, one of my mentors, one of the people I look up to most in the martial arts world. There was some girl who came to his class to do the Thai boxing class, and her boyfriend was like, yeah, okay, whatever, this stuff will never work. Like, yeah, good job, little missy, go to class. And she trained Thai boxing fairly regularly, and then one day she was attacked, and she basically clinched onto the back of the guy's head and kept on delivering skip knees. So left knee, right knee, left knee, right knee, left knee, right knee. Until the guy's pelvis was crushed, he collapsed, and now the boyfriend comes in, yeah, okay, I've got you focus mitts for Missy, I don't know what her name was. If you're with this girl, please get in touch with me, that'd be a great story, I'd love to hear it from the source. So if you're out there, hit me up. Send me an email. So yeah, knees are very good. The big question is always punching. Are you going to punch in a self-defense situation? Generally, I would say yes. You're not going to randomly punch for anywhere. Like this is where people break their hands, punching the top of the head, which is why in a self-defense situation, that is an acceptable block. It's not great. Better to move, better to parry, better to use distance. But if everything's gone to hell and you're about to get punched, present them with the top of your head. It's thick, and that's where people break their hands. So if you're precision punching, and that basically means for this triangle here, yeah, you can knock somebody out hitting them in the temple, but you're not that far from the really thick bone. So I would suggest essentially from the nose on down to the corners of the jaw and here. Anywhere hit in there is generally going to get really good results. You're talking broken jaws, bloody noses, KOs. That's a really good place to hit. So yeah, I think it is worthwhile hitting. If you are going to hit somebody in self-defense, you have to have spent some time hitting heavy objects, like a punching bag, without gloves. You don't want to punch so much that your hands get arthritis, but if you're punching like this, if you're used to punching, if you've been going to kickboxer size class, and there's just a slight bend in your wrist, well guess what, when you hit something hard, that wrist is going to turn over and buckle and bend. So you need to be used to having your hands basically as a block of wood where you're hitting here and here. This is one solid unit. It's not going to buckle this way. It's not going to buckle that way. So you have to hit heavy objects without gloves once in a while. I wouldn't do a ton of it. It's probably not good for your knuckles, but neither is getting attacked. How effective is biting or eye gouging against a skilled grappler in a self-defense situation? Jojo. Jojo wins most frequently asked question award, or most frequently questioning viewer award. How effective is biting or eye gouging? Well, yes and no. The problem is, if you're on the bottom, and I've seen people teach this, yes, in our system of silat or in our system of self-defense, we don't have to worry about any escapes from the bottom, because if we were on the bottom, we would simply bite them. And biting is one of those things that, yes, it can sometimes work, but you've just escalated the fight hugely. If the guy's on top, let's say mount or side mount or headlock or whatever, and you're on bottom, and you decide that your big plan to get out is to bite, then the problem is you've escalated it. Now you've given him the idea to bite. And if you can bite him from the bottom, guess what? He can bite you 10 times as bad from the top. If you're on the bottom of a mountain, you decide to bite his thigh, guess what? He's going to take his thumb, he's going to drive him into your eye, and because of the physics of mount, because of the biomechanics of mount, he's going to do a way better job of gouging out your eyes than you are of opening up his femoral artery or getting a pain compliance response. The other thing is, biting, to a lesser degree eye gouging, but biting especially is basically a pain move. Unless you're, and I was tongue-in-cheek there, you're not actually going to try and gouge his carotid artery out with your teeth, unless you're in a really terrible position. But most of the time, you go bite an arm. Yeah, you're flipping the coin. Sometimes that pain will do the trick and the guy will let go. Other times it'll just make him more angry and you'll have escalated the situation. You won't have de-escalated it. And it's amazing how easy it is to ignore pain when you're really mad. I was with a bunch of guys recently, and they were talking about different self-defense techniques, and in some Hapkido class they've been shown the under the nose pressure point, and yeah, that really hurts in training when you're calm. If you're enraged, there's no way in hell that that's going to work against anybody who's tough. And if you're not talking about fighting tough people, you're back to fighting 70-year-old professors run amok, and then you can use whatever you want. So relying on a pressure point based system or a pain compliance system as opposed to a structural system that gets you out of the actual position, I think is a dangerous thing. Maybe as a last ditch escape, if nothing else is going to work, you might as well try it. But I think it's much, 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 much better to go with a structural solution to the problem. By structural, I mean getting out of the bottom, using essentially jiu-jitsu or sambo or judo, but jiu-jitsu is probably the most readily available and most ground-focused system. So I think it's a very dangerous path to go down. Once you get to the top, then you can bite them all you want, or you can just disengage and run away, which is probably what you should be doing. Justin Baldos, sport or self-defense or sport BJJ? Well, I think to some extent this is a red herring question. This whole, well, I don't want to go to a sport jiu-jitsu class and then learn techniques that I would never, ever, ever use in self-defense versus going to a self-defense school and only concentrating on the 40, 50, 60 techniques that you're ever going to need in a self-defense situation. Going to a self-defense school may seem like a good idea if your main focus is self-defense, and probably it's not a bad idea. But the problem is you're going to be training probably against a lower caliber of people. Like I said, the most important thing that you can do to improve your self-defense skills is to train against close to full resistance against somebody who's trying to do the other thing back to you. If we're boxing, I can hit pads all day. I can hit the secret self-defense combo, the uppercut to the chin, the right hook, the left hook to the temple, and the right cross to the groin. Let's say that's the killer self-defense punching combo. Right? The uppercut, the left hook, and the punch to the groin. I can do that all day long on pads, in the air, as part of form number 1. Oh, aha! I can do that on a wooden dummy, but that wooden dummy isn't trying to do it back to me. I submit to you that going out there, putting gloves on, even if I'm not allowed to fully punch you in the groin, I'm just allowed to punch you in the stomach, putting gloves on, and you and me going at it, and us really trying to hit each other, maybe not kill each other, but really land a punch, and we're kind of sort of the same level, that you'll get more out of that one sparring session for self-defense applications than you will of a year of doing, the perfect, what the hell was it? It was an uppercut, hook, punch to the groin. Certainly that was my experience doing traditional Kung Fu for 5 years. Once or twice a year, we'd be there, we'd be doing Hungar forms, we'd be doing Northern Shaolin forms, we'd be doing Southern Crane, all that imaginary stuff. Again and again and again and again, thousands and thousands of reps. And then once or twice a year, we'd put on headgear, we'd put on chest protectors, put on gloves, and we'd go at it for real. Heavy. With no instruction. Somehow we were supposed to make the transition from, whatever type of Kung Fu we were doing to actually hitting people. And I maintain that I got more out of those 4 sparring sessions a year. You might go twice in an evening for 5 minutes at a time. So 4 sessions a year. I got way more out of those sessions where it was applicable in the street than the year of practicing all that other stuff. So I think there's a real huge advantage of practicing against resistance. So let me just finish up there. So sport defense, or sport versus self-defense. You'll probably have a much higher caliber of people in the sport jiu-jitsu realm. I think it's important to once in a while calibrate your skills and go back to sort of self-defense type training. That's why I think even if you're mostly an inverted guard or collar spider guard specialist, once a year or so, a couple times a year or so, you should take off the gi. You say, okay, now we're going to be allowed to slap each other, knock each other out, put on light bag gloves and under supervision, try to actually hit people. That'll take all the reflexes, all the movements, all the sweeps that you've learned in a sport context, and then really hyper calibrate them for the street. You don't have to be hit in the face very many times to realize, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. You don't have to become MMA experts. A sport jiu-jitsu background with a little bit of, a couple times a year talking about, well, what do you do if the guy grabs your hair? What do you do if the guy tries to eye gouge? Covering, doing a 90-10 split. That might be the best way to prepare for it. Not spending all your time on so-called street self-defense, because probably it means you're not going to be rolling as much, and probably it means that the caliber of people you're training against isn't going to be as good. That's just a broad generalization. I'm sure there are many, many self-defense oriented schools where you do have a high caliber of instruction, you do have a high caliber of people to train against. Am I ever going to sell those awesome Grapplearts Dragon shirts again? The silver ones? They're tough to get. If I've got one potential source for sending out the silver foil prints. If you're on my email list, then I might do something in the future. Thanks for the kick in the ass. I was just talking to a guy about it today. We may be able to pull it off. Are there specific jiu-jitsu schools focused on self-defense? Are they all the same in terms of self-defense? Yes and no. Next question. No. Of course, there are schools that focus just on self-defense. Use your internet, go looking for them, and you might very well be able to find a school. Are they all the same? Of course not. Of course not. 100% no. I'll go into a little rant, my default rant. Stephan, where should I train? Stephan, what school should I go to? Well, you know what? If you're going to get good at martial arts, you're looking at years of training. You are going to spend years with these people. If you don't like these people, if you don't like how the instructor is, that's going to be a long bunch of years. And you'll also be less motivated to continue to train. So if you want to start training, you owe it to yourself to spend a week or two going to every single school in your neighborhood, every single school in your city that's within a reasonable distance. Go, check it, go there and train, take a class, don't sign up, go there and train, see how you like it, take notes because you won't remember, go to the next school the next night. Doing that 2-week tour, for one, you'll get a good introduction to the martial arts scene in your city. For two, you'll be able to see what school works for you. Oh man, the guys in this school are a bunch of douches. Oh, everybody at this school was nice, but I didn't like the instructor. At this other school, I liked the instructor, I liked the people, the washrooms were dirty. Can I live with dirty washrooms in exchange for a good instructor and a good training partner? So the most important thing actually is your training partners, then is your instructor, and then is the facilities. The training partners are who you're actually rolling with day in, day out to get better. And if they're all a bunch of jerks, you're not going to enjoy training them, unless you're a jerk too. Malik says, we occasionally do slaps and punches during rolling. It makes a huge difference. You bet. You bet. It changes things super quickly. And like I said, you don't need to do it that often. Do it every couple of months, every 6 months. You'll remember. You'll remember if you got hit in the face lightly, and somebody needs to supervise this, and somebody needs to say, hey, Guido, 1/3 is hard punches. Once egos get flaring and people get hit a little bit, things tend to get out of control. So you do need a strong personality closely supervising this. But you'll retain the lessons learned for a long time. I remember things that I learned when I was 15 years old sparring full contact in Hung Gar Kung Fu. I remember specific exchanges. That was a long bloody time ago. So if you do punching and slapping and light contact, sort of MMA style or self-defense style rolling every once in a while, you'll retain it for half a year, 30 years in my case. Don't worry, a little bit goes a long way. Sizing up and attack in the street. How do you quickly build a game plan in determining who you're against? There's a lot of assessment that goes on when you're in a potentially violent situation. Number one is, where are the guy's hands? If the guy's hands disappear behind his back, you don't know what's in them. Even if one hand, screw you and your mother too. Like, this hand just disappeared. Is it pulling out a knife? Is it going for a gun? Is it taking a chain that's going to whack you? If you can't see the guy's hands, you have to assume he's armed. That's a heuristic. If you cannot see the guy's hands, you have to assume he has a weapon and increase your distance accordingly. Other things you're going to size up for, there are a whole bunch of things that you size up for, and you know what? You're already good at it. You're the product, your great Neanderthal grandfather was good at this. Because if he hadn't been good at it, quickly sizing up a situation and figuring out, am I in danger here? He wouldn't have survived. And your the next guy, or then your mother, your great grandmother, she was good at it because she survived. So you come from a long line of people, survivors, who went through far more dangerous times than now. All the archaeological evidence says that basically it was a bloody bloodbath back then. Whether you're looking at Neolithic Europe, whether you're looking at Roman times, whether you're looking at the Middle Ages, it was way more violent. People had to make these decisions all the time. So we are the survivors of people who are really good at summing up danger. So you're going to be looking at clothing. You're going to be looking at size. You're going to be looking at things like, do they have cauliflowered ears? You're going to be looking at tribal markings. Do they have, are they flying Hell's Angels colors maybe? That would be an important thing. If you're sizing up, do they have tight jeans on? Well, then you don't have to worry about kicks if they've got that. What kind of boots do they have on? Do they have something that looks like it's designed for putting the boots to somebody on the ground? And also, very important, I don't know about most importantly, but very, very importantly, means scanning for other people. Maybe it's just one guy in your face to distract you while the other guy comes up and clubs you from behind. So maintaining that 360-degree awareness at all times and a maintenance of the distance. Those two things give you the time that you need to assess a situation. There's a great book by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear, and it talks about the rapid decision-making process that we do to evaluate situations and trusting your gut. Of course, your gut can be fooled. The super nice guy dressed like a Mormon going door to door could be a psychopath. And he might just be knocking on your door as you open the door to say, okay, sorry, not interested, not today, and then he stabs you. That could happen, but that's pretty rare. Most of the time, in retrospect, you'll be saying, man, I really didn't feel good about that situation. I just started getting the creeps, and I didn't do anything about it. So when you start getting the creeps, and you start worrying about some situation, change it. Take some actions. Start making distance and maintain that 360-degree awareness. I think this is a topic that we really need to go into in depth, and I'm not going to do it here. So I might write an article about it. Actually, in fact, there is an article about awareness already on the self-defense tutorial site. What percentage do I roll gi versus no gi? This is self-defense related. I think the people who say, I only train no gi because in a self-defense situation, the guy's not going to be wearing a gi. Well, yes and no, depending where you live. Now, I live fairly far north. Guarantee you for 6 months of the year at least, people are going to be wearing a heavy jacket People can be wearing raincoats. People can be wearing parkas. That's a gi. Also, there are lots of tricks that you can do with a t-shirt to get a gi-like control over somebody. And I'm probably going to, that's going to be a really good YouTube video to do. So we'll be putting that out. Personally, I probably do 60-40 gi no gi. And that's just because a couple of training partners I have right now are more focused on gi. But I really like to do the both. And I try to make my gi game not hyper gi specific. I try to make it a good mix of techniques that'll work gi and no gi. Sure, I've got a couple little tricks that only work with the gi. Everybody does. But by and large, 80% of what I do in the gi is pretty much identical to what I do no gi, because I don't have the time to train both games. To have a crazy worm guard game for gi and a completely other closed guard game for no gi. I just don't have the time to develop two entirely different systems, and I figure if I spend both times, my gi time and my no gi time, more or less doing the same thing, it's going to lift all boats. That rising tide will lift all boats as opposed to having something that only works in one arena. So for me, right now it's about 60-40, gi no gi, but it's gone as low as 80-20 in the past, but I always try and do a little bit of both. If I had to break down percentages for street defense, stand-up grappling versus knife and gun training. Okay, so this is a bit of a trick question. I think some awareness of weapons training, and weapons includes everything from knives to pepper spray to sticks to guns. I mean, firearms are kind of pretty separate from the other weapons, but they're weapons, they're still in the weapons camp. Versus doing a grappling, was it stand-up grappling the question? Yeah. Oh, sorry, stand-up versus grappling versus knife and gun defense. If you're interested, or if you need a self-defense system, you do need to have all three. You do need to have some basic stand-up. You don't need to be a Mike Tyson. You don't need to be an Anderson Silva, dodging bullets or dodging punches Matrix style. But you do need to know how to throw a powerful cross, how to throw a powerful knee, how to throw a powerful elbow, how to do basic punches, where the basic targets are. This can be acquired not over too long a time. You're not trying to become a Golden Gloves boxer. You're not trying to become a world-class MMA guy. But you do need to know how to throw a punch, because sometimes the right thing to do will be to throw a punch. Sometimes the right answer to a situation will be to grab somebody by the head and keep on kneeing them until they fall down, or until they give up and they tackle you, which takes you to the stand-up or the grappling range. Because I count grappling both standing and on the ground. You need to know how to defend a takedown. Even if you're a jiu-jitsu brown belt, you're really good on the ground, and somebody's trying to tackle you, you don't want to necessarily go to the ground. If you can deal with that situation standing, if you got a stick in your hand and you're a jiu-jitsu brown belt and the guy tackles you, hit him with a stick. Don't throw your stick away and pull him into your guard and work your collar choke. So you're going to need to know defensive grappling, how not to be taken down to the ground, and that is a grappling skill. And once again, you can't train this in isolation. You can't train this, going, okay, I'm going to attack you and you're going to do defense number 1. All right, let's do that 3 times, now defense number 2. No, it's a good starting point, but ultimately you need to get in there and you need to be trying to take your opponent down, your training partner, and he needs to be trying to take you down. And then you'll learn to use those, training to, takedown defense number 1 in a live context. You'll learn to use takedown defense number 2 in a live context. Weapons training, I think, is really important. Weapons are the great equalizer, and they're the great threat. Sure, you can get killed by somebody punching you in the head. Typically, it's not you getting punched in the head, it's you getting punched in the head, knocked out, and then hitting your head on the concrete, because I guarantee you it's pretty rare to have somebody who can hit you harder than your weight falling from 6 feet onto the edge of a curb. That's usually, not always, but that's often where those one-punch knockout fatalities come from. So you do need to have some standing, you do need to have grappling. You can essentially get really badly hurt if the other guy's a better grappler than you, and if you don't know how to get out of mount, and the guy just gets to mount and keeps on hitting you and hitting you and hitting you and hitting you, might break all his knuckles, but your face is going to get the worst end of it. The weapons end of things, you really need to have some basic understanding of. You need some basic understanding and comprehension of firearms. I said earlier in this broadcast that the idea of disarming a handgun held at your waist when there's a robbery is a stupid idea. I think that, but understanding the capabilities of a gun is really important. There's really no better way to learn to defend something than learn to attack with it. No better way to learn to defend against leg locks than learning a few leg locks yourself. No better way to learn to defend against a cross than becoming half decent with your own cross. No better way to learn what a gun, a handgun, or a rifle can or cannot do than acquiring some basic familiarity with shooting it yourself. Because then you'll have an intuitive understanding of what works and what doesn't. When it comes to the shorter range weapons and firearms, we're talking about sticks and knives and broken bottles. I come from a fairly strong Kali background, Kali Arnesa Eskrima, and they teach that pretty much all weapons are the same. Let's just grab something here. All right, so we've got your basic Sykes Fairburn dagger. Basically, I can cut you here, 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 here. I can stab you here, I can stab you here, and I can stab you here. Those are most of the angles. Just like in the roadmap for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I talked about most of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu can be explained by 6 positions. In Kali, you only have a limited number of strikes. And it doesn't matter if you're using a knife, if you're using a tripod that I didn't end up using. I don't think hitting somebody like this would be your number 1 move with a tripod, but you know what? If this was a bit bigger, I'd sure whack you with it. So learning to defend against the basic angles, most systems have 12 angles. The first 5 are the most important. Down, down, across, across, and then some kind of thrust. If you learn how to deal with those, regardless of whether it's a knife, a pool cue, a broken bottle, a chain, a camera tripod that I didn't use, it doesn't matter. The dealing with the angle is pretty much dealing with the angle. You're going to use the same zoning, you're going to use the same blocks, you can use the same parries, you might use the same disarms. Now, of course, there's some differences between what you can get away with a knife versus a stick. If you're whacking at me with a stick, I might decide to crash and just absorb that blow on the forearm. That wouldn't be my first choice if you had a machete. But familiarization with those lines of attack a little bit goes a long way. So yeah, I think it's really important. I'll quote Jocko Willink, who we actually wrote an entire article about on self-defense tutorials. What is the most important martial art for self-defense? And his argument, so this is a Navy SEAL, tons of gun experience, grenades, knives, hatchets. And basically, if you're grappling as a Navy SEAL, you've probably, to quote Kurt Oceana, you've probably screwed up a long time ago, right? But the best defense against a knife is to run. The best defense against a baseball bat is to run. The best defense against multiple attackers is to run. When can't you run? It's if there's a grappling situation. If I'm there and punching at you and you turn around and run away, if I stay here, you've run away. If I'm here using my deadly Taekwondo kicks and you run away and I stay in place, I'm not hurting you anymore. If I grab onto you, you can no longer run. So that has turned a situation to a grappling situation. So grappling is a fundamental skill to get out of situations. And we're saying we just work on counter grappling is crap. If you don't work on grappling, then just work on counter grappling. Again, unless you train it for real, unless you know how to do it, you don't know how to defend it. Unless you train it live, you don't know how to use it for real. Jason Ma makes a point about knowing your legal rights when it comes to self-defense and what the legal consequences are. If one of the last confrontations I was in, I'll tell the full story another time, but basically this drunk guy was coming towards me. I was in Mexico and I'd intervened to help out some Mexicans that this guy was being belligerent to. And he was like coming at me and swearing and like trying to puff his chest out like that. And my first thought was, good, I'm gonna punch him in the throat. And then I was like, hang on, I'm in Mexico. Even if I punch him in the throat and he goes down and I kill him, I'm gonna end up in a Mexican prison and my kids are upstairs in the hotel room. So my next thought was, okay, I'm gonna foot sweep him and he's gonna take him down and knee mount and punch him. And it's like, oh, okay, no, hang on. I had lots of time to think about this. Because the guy was coming slowly like this. My next thought was, I'm gonna foot sweep him, knee mount, hit him, knock him out. And it's like, no. If he falls, he's gonna hit his head on the marble floor. I might kill him, I'll end up in a Mexican prison. My kids will end up in a Mexican orphanage. Not good. So my next plan, was a much safer one. So arm drag to rear naked choke. It's like, yeah, that's probably the right one. So that decision-making tree was predicated on the legal situation that I did not want to end up in. So knowing the legalities of self-defense is really important. Generally, as a very general rule, if you come and punch me and I stab you in the throat, I've not reacted with equal force. Most jurisdictions, I believe, I'm not a lawyer, but most jurisdictions, I believe in equal force, right? If I'm a big guy and I punch you, and in self-defense you punch me and knock me out, great, that was equal force. If you have a knife and I take a kitchen knife and I stab you, well, that was equal force. If you come at me, you know, like this, and I take a baseball bat and beat you over the head with it, well, I've just exceeded equal force, and I'm now culpable. And I don't know what happens in Texas. Texas, man, you've got some weird ass rules when it comes to self-defense and preservation of property. And I'll let you guys, you know, berate me in the comments below. But, you know, maybe you can explain what the Texas rules of self-defense are. If a fight is inevitable, do you think you should strike first in a self-defense situation? Kind of address this. If a fight is inevitable, yeah, ideally you're acting rather than reacting. It's much, much easier to attack than it is to, you know, oh, I'm going to counter that punch and now I'm going to launch my own counterattack. Because it's probably not going to be one punch. It's probably going to be a swarm of punches. And you can't predict what it's going to be. Maybe the guy pulls out a knife. Maybe the guy pulls out pepper sprays you and then shoots you. You don't know. So if a fight is absolutely inevitable, yeah, better that you launch it. But now there's all the legal ramifications. At that point, you don't have a leg to stand on legally. Your Honor, I thought he was going to attack me, so I punched him in the throat. Well, probably not too many courts in any country are going to buy that. So yeah, maybe the rule is do unto others and then run. Any judo apps coming up? No, not in the immediate future. There's lots of really good judo instructionals out there, and you should check those out. You know, it's amazing how professional some of the instructional material in the judo world is compared to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world. There's also some really, really good books, the Judo Masterclass books, for example. So I feel like unless I had something new to add to that, I don't just want to rehash old material. All right, Richard Fishbein says, I am right with regards to the law. So thanks for posting there. What advice would I give to male or female senior citizens when it comes to protecting themselves? Well, this isn't a sexy topic. I'm going to say something that's not at all sexy. Because what you want to hear is, don't worry, senior citizens are perfectly capable of throwing high side kicks and spinning wheel kicks, and with a bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they can choke people out. And that might be true for some senior citizens, but what's important for senior citizens more than anything else, and the same is true for you if you're a 25-year-old gym monkey, is awareness. You have to maintain awareness. Somebody's knocking at your door. Who is it? Why are they knocking? Before just opening the door, have a look. You're walking down the street and your spider sense starts tingling. Do something about it. Don't just keep on going. A lot of people prey on seniors because they're getting a little bit foggy upstairs, and that's a really tough thing to address, because I'm basically saying, use your awareness, use your brain. And so I don't think that applies if you're in early stage Alzheimer's or you know, senility. So assuming that you still have all your mental faculties about you, familiarizing yourself with the typical problems that are in your neighborhood that seniors are going to run into. Oh yeah, you know, like learning that a Nigerian prince is very, very, very unlikely to email you with a special offer that you only need to transfer $10,000 into his bank account, and then he will you know, reimburse you millions of dollars because his great-grandfather died. That this is a scam. That you know, people coming to your door and asking to use your telephone is probably not a good idea. You know, maybe they were raised in a different era when people did that, but nowadays people don't do that. Probably the only person coming to the door and asking to use a telephone is somebody who wants to take advantage of you. So awareness is really the key. The rest is really dependent on their physical capabilities. I mean, physical fitness is the foundation of everything. It's even the foundation of awareness. If you're in a situation where you're running from an attacker, you should still have to maintain awareness. You have to keep an eye on whether there's somebody behind you, is there people in front of you, are you going into a bad part of town, are you running out in the street and going to get run over by a car? That's still awareness. If you're so tunneled by exhaustion and you can't breathe, your intelligence, your awareness, your perception, everything goes to crap. So, your physical attributes underlie your ability to pull off any self-defense moves. If you're so weak that you can barely bend over and pick up a box, well, good luck doing an armbar, because like picking up a box here is engaging your spinal erectors and your hips to pick something up. How are you going to do an armbar if you have difficulty picking up a box? So I think for senior citizens, some strength and conditioning is super important because it'll keep them sharper mentally. There's lots of science showing that. It'll prevent, honestly, the danger of falling and breaking your hip is a lot higher than some random guy coming and, your money or your life. That's a pretty easy answer, by the way. It's your money. Give your money. But the odds of physically incapacitating yourself, as opposed to being physically incapacitated by some attacker, are much, much higher as you get older. So I would actually make the argument that working on your physical conditioning, taking a basic weight training for seniors course, is probably the single best thing you can do for self-defense. Once that's under control, then I think some jiu-jitsu, because probably you're smaller, you're weaker, and the only place you're going to be able to win a fight really is on the ground, unless you're armed. So you got to go either really, really, really close, jiu-jitsu, or really, really far away, handguns. So those are the answers. While we're on the topic of fitness, I'm not even talking fitness, I'm talking health. Here's something I find really, really strange. You have a lot of obese and overweight, combatives instructors. Yeah. So when Billy Bob grabs you, first you go for the fingers, and you break the fingers apart, and then you jab them in the eyes, and then you expose the neck, and now you chew through the carotid. That guy's in way more danger of dropping dead from a heart attack while plowing down on the 3 burgers at Carl's Jr. than he is from ever being attacked. So I can't understand this fascination with, the world's most deadly technique if you're not in shape to actually, jog a half mile, do 25 push-ups, not have a giant belly. These are not good things. The Sistema guy, the Russian guy with a great big belly, it's a joke. If you're that big and you're that fat, your self-defense skills could be on another planet, but you're going to die of a stroke in your sleep. And statistically, you're far more likely to die of a stroke in your sleep or a heart attack while running for the bus than you are cancer or losing your limbs from diabetes than you are being attacked. Walking down the street and somebody jumps out and let's fight. Could happen. Could happen. It's possible. It's not very likely. The reality is that self-defense includes protecting your body and protecting yourself. And so work on your nutrition, work on your basic fitness, work on your basic cardio. We're not talking about turning you into a marathon runner, just enough to keep your heart going and not develop arterial clogs all over your body. That's actually a really important component of self-defense, in my humble opinion. Suppose I'm walking on the street and a potential burglar approaches. What do you recommend when you're walking with a parent, child, or friend? What's the best course of action to protect them? I'm assuming that you mean mugger or robber, not burglar. Burglar in my vocabulary anyway means somebody breaking into a building. So if you see somebody breaking into a building or somebody's breaking into your building, it's an entirely different set of circumstances. Somebody's breaking into your building, arm yourself. Get a stick. There's a funny, back in the day, I lived in a really bad part of town with my brother. And one night there was a commotion outside, somebody broke a window, and then there was screaming, and there was screaming back. It was just a bunch of drunken or super high idiots really getting their yelling and screaming. So at the time I had this ornamental sword. It's a heavy piece of the Filipino sword. Didn't have an edge on it, but still an impressive piece of metal. So I had long hair at the time, I was wearing boxer shorts, came out with a sword onto the porch. People in underwear with swords you should generally avoid. At the same time, the little pothead who lived upstairs came down because he'd heard the same commotion. He's like, I'd never met the guy. I knew that somebody had moved in. And he opens the door, like, hey man, what's going on? Hey, how's it going? And he closes the door and backs away. The upshot of that was that he was super polite for the whole rest of the year. Like, hey man, me and my band, we're just gonna practice. Is it okay? Are we gonna bother you if we practice? No, go ahead and practice. It was like a death metal country band. It was the worst thing ever. But they were very, very polite about it. And the fact that our first introduction had me with a sword in my hand was a pretty big attention getter. It was a pretty big wake-up call, and the guy, respected me, maybe for the wrong reasons, for the whole rest of the year that we lived in that same building. Similarly, if there's a break-in in the house, arm yourself. Now, if you're talking about a situation on the street, that's tricky. If you're with your kid, you have to have thought these things through. If you're with your wife, hopefully she knows enough to, get on the phone and call 911, or at least have her phone handy. I think having one person be the physical point person and have somebody else there with a phone, and you can even use that as a threat. I'm calling 911 right now. I'm calling 911. Hello, 911. Yeah, we're being threatened. It's a white male, about 5'5". He's wearing a blue jacket. Most guys are going to take off. So, and if they don't take off, if the situation escalates, at least hopefully there's police on scene, en route to you. So knowing how to interplay between the phone. If it's a child, obviously you have to protect it. Get it behind you. Some of the worst potential situations I was ever in, I was going through a really rough part of town. I had my then 2-year-old child strapped to the front of my chest, and I was like, man, this is so stupid. If one of these junkies here gets in my face, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. I can't run. I've got this squalling 2-year-old strapped to my chest, and I can't, I can't fight. Like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to protect this precious life that's in front of me? So certainly, if your child is old enough, you can pass it off to somebody, at least so it doesn't encumber you. I think having the people that are with you trained not to hold you back. If you watch a lot of street fight videos, like I do, it's pretty common to see 2 guys squaring off, and it's like, no, Johnny, don't fight. And Susie grabs Johnny, and at that point the other guy sees the opportunity and clocks Johnny real good. So hopefully the person that you're with backs you up rather than entangling you, and doesn't make the situation worse by losing their mind. A lot of people do a lot of really stupid things when there are women around, because sometimes the women egg things on, right? They want to feel like there's an alpha male battle going on for them. Sometimes people do stupid things because they feel like their child and their wife are threatened. But on the other hand, that's a huge, huge, huge source of energy. If you thought, imagine you and I were fighting. Now imagine that if I get through you, I'm going to go and I'm going to slice the throat of your 3-year-old. How much harder are you going to fight? You're going to do everything it takes. You're going to have such an enormous adrenaline thing. You'll be able to pick somebody up and body slam them if they're 100 pounds heavier. It's the ultimate example of that whole woman lifting the car off of her kid. It's the same thing, just you can use all that adrenaline to channel into the fight. If you've trained how to use your adrenaline, and that's where the sparring comes in. If you've only ever done one-step sparring or self-defense technique number 1, self-defense technique number 2, and you've never actually combatively wrestled with your adrenaline up, then that massive adrenaline dump could be crippling. It's another reason that some form of sparring is so very, very important. And Richard the lawyer asks, are things like hoodie chokes, t-shirt chokes, and other chokes effective? Most of them. Some of them I've seen are pretty silly. I don't like the one, for example, where you pull the sleeve over your own hand and use that as a choke because it removes the hand. But there are tons of good chokes that use your own clothing and use your opponent's clothing. And I think that's a really good topic for an upcoming YouTube video. So if you stay with me, especially if you sign up for the newsletter at Self-Defense Tutorials, then when we put those videos out, when we finally shoot them and edit them, I'll send a notification to that email list. Don't know if I'm going to do that for Grapplearts. It's kind of in the intermediate territory between self-defense and grappling. So I think that material is mostly going to go on the Self-Defense Tutorials site and out to the Self-Defense Tutorials newsletter. Keith Norman says, if you're about to be attacked, shout fire. People will not respond to rape and help, but they'll always run towards the fire. I don't know, this is a common wisdom, and I don't know if it's true. I haven't heard of anybody actually doing it. If you have actually documented cases of this happening, people successfully using the fire gambit, please let me know. That'd be something that'd be really interesting. I think making a lot of noise in general is not a bad thing. Because even if people don't come, the guy that you're in a confrontation with is worried about people coming. He doesn't want to go to jail. He doesn't want people coming. So if you're being really, really, really super loud and yelling and screaming, people are going to call the cops. The famous Kitty Genovese story turned out to be mostly false. That was a story where the woman called for help for a long, long time, and the entire apartment building of people there, nobody called police. I remember reading an investigation of that showed that was mostly false, and I think that's where a lot of the myth comes from. So I think yelling, just call the police, probably works. However, if you know somebody who's tried the fire gambit, fire, 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 call the fire department, let me know. That'd be something that'd be really interesting to know. I know it's touted as an answer to what to do when you're in a bad situation. But I don't know the origins of that. That might be a myth, but maybe I'm just projecting. Because if somebody was yelling, help, 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 I would go and I would try to help. You would probably too. But we're talking about society as large, and they may not be as brave as us superhumans, or as stupid. So, I see that my phone is about to run out of energy, and I am got to get a few things done before tomorrow. So I think I'm going to bring this to a close. Thank you very, very much for being on this Q&A. I really enjoyed it. It made me work mentally. Like I said, just one more time, if you're interested in the self-defense aspects of it, selfdefensetutorials.com. It's a new site that we're launching, very much focused on self-defense, and I think it'll be a useful adjunct to the training that you're already doing. We're going to look at a lot of real-life situations. We're going to try and cover some weapon stuff, some multiple attacker stuff, the different types of fighting like we discussed. You need to have some weapons strategies, you need to have some stand-up strategies, you need some grappling strategies, and you need some mix of those things. You can have a ton of weapon stuff. We need a little bit of grappling. You need a little bit of empty-hand stand-up. You can have a ton of empty-handed stand-up. You need a little bit of weapons. You need a little bit of grappling. You need to round your game out so you're not a one-trick pony and you're not a one-range pony. All right? Thank you so much. Have a good night. See you on the next